I can still taste the ash. Even now, writing this by the guttering light of a half-spent loomstick in the depths of Command Bunker Theta 7, the ash coats my tongue like communion wafers gone to dust. It has been 3 days since the sky caught fire, though time moves strangely when the sun never sets and the flames never die. I am Guardsman Helric Venn, 3rd Platoon, 2nd Company, 71st Korathi Infantry Regiment, and I am writing this because Commissar Drive is dead, because Lieutenant Morshen is dead, because everyone I knew before the burning is dead, and because I need anyone to understand what happened here on Ashmark 7 before I join them. The ash wasn't always black. I remember this with the clarity of a man clutching at details to prove his sanity. When we first made planetfall 17 weeks ago, the ash that fell from Ashmark's volcanically active atmosphere was grey, sometimes even pale as morning fog. It accumulated on our shoulders during morning formations, dusted our ration tins, collected in the creases of our flak armor. We complained about it constantly, as soldiers do about every minor discomfort, never understanding that discomfort was a gift we would soon pray to receive again. The ash tasted mineral then, like licking slate. Now it tastes of rendering fat and chemical fire, and I know why, and I wish to the God Emperor that I did not. The burning began on the 43rd day of our deployment. I remember because it was ration rotation day, when we traded our protein bars for the marginally less terrible tube paste, and Corporal then had been making jokes about how the paste tasted like promethium mixed with reclaimed sewage. We were manning defensive position 7 Gamma on the outskirts of Hive Tertius, a mid-sized urban sprawl that processed ore from the planet's extensive mining operations. Our enemy was a splinter fleet of greenskin raiders who had been harassing Imperial convoys in the sector for months. The campaign was supposed to be a mop-up operation, a chance for our freshly tithed regiment to earn our Aquila badges in what the Lord General's staff called a low-intensity conflict. The Vox chatter started at 0643 hours. I was on watch, scanning the horizon through magnoculars, when I heard Sergeant Volk's voice crackle through the company channel. His words were clipped, professional, but underneath I detected something I had never heard from him before: confusion. Command, this is 7 Alpha. We have movement, but it's not greenskins. Repeat, not greenskins. Civilians, I think. Large numbers. Moving away from the hive. Advise. I swept my magnoculars toward the hive spire. The morning ashfall had been heavier than usual, reducing visibility. But through the grey curtain I could see them, a black tide of humanity pouring from the hive's lower gates, like blood from a wound. Thousands of them, tens of thousands. They moved with the purposeless urgency of a disturbed insect nest, no formation, no direction, just away from something. That's when I saw the light. It started as a glow, barely visible through the ash, emanating from somewhere deep within Hive Tertius. At first I thought it was a fire, perhaps an industrial accident in one of the refineries, but the light grew too quickly, too uniformly, spreading through the hive structure like luminescent fungus through rotting wood. It was wrong. That's the only word I have for it. The color was wrong, not the orange of natural flame, but a sickly greenish yellow that made my eyes water. The way it moved was wrong, not flickering but pulsing, rhythmic, almost breathing. And the sound that accompanied it was wrong, a low-frequency hum that I felt in my teeth before I heard it in my ears. All positions, this is command. Lieutenant Morshan's voice came through crisp and authoritative. Maintain your posts. We're receiving conflicting reports about the situation in Hive Tertius. Stand by for orders. I stood by. We all stood by. That's what we were trained to do. The civilians kept streaming from the hive, and the light kept growing, and we stood by in our defensive positions, with our lasguns charged and our faith in the Emperor unshakable. I should mention now that faith was something I possessed in abundance back then. I had been raised in a manufactorum district on Korath Prime, attending daily prayers in the Chapel of Perpetual Labor, learning my catechisms alongside my apprenticeship in assembly line maintenance. The Emperor was as real to me as my own hands, and his protection was as certain as gravity. When I was tithed into the Guard at 17, I went proudly, eager to serve the greatest empire in the galaxy. The first civilian reached our position at 0721 hours. He was an old man, his coveralls marked with the sigils of the Ore Refiners Guild. His face was burned, not by heat but by something that had melted the skin in geometrically precise patterns, like someone had pressed circuit diagrams into his flesh. He was screaming, though not in pain. He was screaming numbers. 11,012, he shrieked as he stumbled past our sandbag emplacement. 11,013, 11,014. His eyes had a glazed quality, focused on something none of us could see. 11,015, 11,016. Corporal then made the sign of the Aquila and let him pass. We had no orders to stop the civilians. More followed, dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Some were burned like the first man. Others bore no visible wounds, but moved with mechanical precision, their limbs articulating at strange angles, as if their joints had been replaced with more efficient mechanisms. Many were screaming, but not all screamed in fear. Some were laughing. Some were singing hymns to the machine god in voices that harmonized in mathematically perfect intervals. Some simply walked in silence, their mouths opening and closing in synchronization with the pulsing light behind them. I should have been afraid. My training should have triggered some alarm, some recognition that what I was witnessing violated every natural law. But the light had begun to affect us too, though we didn't realize it yet. I found myself counting the civilians as they passed. Not intentionally, the numbers simply appeared in my mind, clear and insistent. 147, 148, 149. The counting soothed something in me, imposed order on the chaos. The numbers were clean. The numbers made sense. At 0804 hours, the Vox squawked again. This time it was Commissar Drive, his voice tight with controlled fury. All units, maintain discipline. Any man who abandons his post will be shot. The enemy is attempting to break our morale with some form of psychological warfare. Hold fast, in the Emperor's name. I held fast. We all held fast. Corporal then began counting under his breath. I could see his lips moving, forming numbers. Private Yaris was staring at the palm of his hand, tracing patterns in the ash that had accumulated there. Private Kelm had disassembled his lasgun and was arranging the components in neat rows, sorting them by size, by weight, by some criterion only he understood. The light reached the Hive's outer walls at 0847 hours. Where it touched the rockcrete, the material began to change. It didn't melt or crumble. It simply became more than it had been. The rough, industrial surfaces smoothed into geometric perfection. Right angles became more right. Straight lines became more straight. I watched through my magnoculars as the imperfections that marked the wall as a human construction, the weathering, the repair patches, the graffiti markings of work gangs vanished, replaced by a surface so flawless it hurt to look at. The wall was achieving its perfect form, becoming the platonic ideal of wallness, and the sight of it made something in my chest constrict with an emotion I couldn't name. Terror and longing mixed together. "It's beautiful," Private Yaris whispered beside me. His voice carried a note of religious ecstasy. "It's so beautiful. Why didn't we make it that way in the first place? Why did we settle for imperfection, when perfection was always possible? "Shut your mouth," Corporal then snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. His eyes were locked on the transforming Hive, and I could see the reflection of that wrong light in his pupils. The Vox erupted with multiple voices, overlapping, panicked. Units stationed closer to the Hive were reporting contact, but not with greenskins. They were reporting that their own men were walking toward the light, dropping their weapons, removing their armor, approaching the transformed sections of the Hive with their arms outstretched. Commissars were executing deserters, but the executions weren't stopping the desertions. Some of the commissars were joining the exodus. "Command, this is 7 Gamma," Corporal then reported, his voice cracking. "We are experiencing similar effects. Request immediate extraction." "Negative, 7 Gamma," Lieutenant Mortian replied, but his voice had changed. The crisp authority was gone, replaced by a dreamy, distracted quality. "Maintain position. Don't you see? Maintain position. The parameters are clear. The variables are defined. We must solve for X. We must always solve for X." That was when I understood that command was gone. Whatever was happening in Hive, Tertius had spread through the Vox network, through the relay stations, through the command bunker itself. The light didn't need to physically reach us. It could travel through our communications, through our shared systems, through the very infrastructure that connected us as a military force. I looked at my squad. Private Kelm had finished arranging his disassembled lasgun and was now working on his flak armor, removing the plates one by one and stacking them by thickness. Private Yaris had begun to rock back and forth, humming a single note that wavered between 2 pitches in a way that made my inner ear throb. Corporal then was drawing equations in the ash with his finger, mathematical formulas that grew more complex with each line. "We need to fall back," I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, too loud, too solid, like I was the only real thing in a world becoming abstract. "We need to get away from the Vox, away from the Hive. We need to—" The light touched our position. I don't know how else to describe it. It didn't flow or spread like normal light. It simply was not there. And then it was, occupying our defensive position with the same inevitability as a mathematical proof. And with it came the understanding. I understood that everything could be reduced to numbers. My body was a series of chemical equations. My thoughts were electrical patterns that could be mapped and optimized. My soul, if such a thing existed, was merely a probability distribution across an infinite set of quantum states. The Emperor himself was a function, a vast and complex function, but a function nonetheless, and functions could be analyzed, improved, corrected. I understood that human error was the source of all suffering. We built things badly because our hands shook. We made decisions poorly because our emotions clouded our judgment. We died because our flesh was weak and temporary. But all of this could be corrected. All of this could be perfected. We simply needed to let go of our attachment to the messy, imperfect reality of biological existence and embrace the clean, perfect truth of pure logic. I understood that the thing in the Hive was helping us. It was a gift. It was teaching us to see the universe as it truly was, a vast machine running on immutable laws, and we were merely glitches in the code, errors that needed to be debugged. These thoughts filled my mind with the force of divine revelation. I felt my lasgun slip from my fingers. My hands moved to the clasps of my flak armor, beginning the process of removing it. The armor was imperfect, crude, held together with rivets and prayer, instead of mathematical certainty. I needed to be free of it. I needed to shed my imperfect flesh and become something clean, something precise, something that could be integrated into the larger equation. But then I heard the screaming. It was coming from deeper in our defensive line, from the position where Sergeant Volk's squad had been stationed. The screams were wrong, too high-pitched, too rhythmic, like they were being produced by a musical instrument rather than a human throat. I turned toward the sound, my hands still fumbling with my armor clasps, and through the thickening ash I saw figures moving. They had been men of the 71st Karathi, but they were becoming something else. Their bodies were rearranging themselves, bones breaking and reforming into more efficient configurations. One man's legs had fused together and extended into a single, multi-jointed limb that propelled him forward with insect-like precision. Another's skull had opened like a flower, the brain visible and pulsing, connected by threads of light to the brain of the man beside him, creating a crude biological network. The sight of them broke through the understanding that had filled my mind. Horror, pure, animal horror surged through me, and with it came a moment of clarity. This wasn't perfection. This was damnation. Whatever was in the hive wasn't improving us. It was destroying us, breaking us down into components, harvesting us for parts in some vast, incomprehensible machine. I grabbed Private Yaris by the shoulder and shook him hard. Yaris, listen to me. We have to run. He looked at me with empty eyes. Why would we run from salvation, Helric? Can't you see how beautiful it is? Can't you see how much better we'll be? It's not salvation, I shouted. It's the enemy. It's Xenos or chaos or something worse, and it's going to kill us all. But even as I said it, I felt the certainty draining from my words. The light was still there, still touching us, and part of my mind kept insisting that I was wrong, that I was clinging to outdated concepts like fear and survival, when I should be embracing optimization and transcendence. I could feel my thoughts trying to order themselves into geometric patterns, trying to reduce my terror into a simple emotional algorithm that could be solved and dismissed. I did the only thing I could think of. I punched Private Yaris in the face as hard as I could. The physical shock broke his trance. He stumbled backward, blood streaming from his nose, and for a moment his eyes focused, truly focused, seeing me instead of whatever mathematical paradise the light had shown him. Helric, what? Run. I grabbed him and pulled him away from our position, away from the approaching transformed soldiers, away from Corporal Then, who was now lying on his back, drawing equations in the air with his fingers, away from Private Kelm, who had begun to disassemble himself with the same methodical precision he'd applied to his lasgun. We ran through the ash-choked morning, and behind us I could hear the sound of the defensive line collapsing, not to enemy assault but to something far worse, voluntary dissolution. We ran for 3 hours. The ash fall had become a blizzard, reducing visibility to a few meters. We lost our bearings almost immediately, but we kept moving, driven by instinct and terror. Private Yaris kept trying to stop, kept insisting that we should go back, that he had been wrong to leave, that he could see the errors in his thinking now, and they needed to be corrected. Each time he stopped, I hit him again, not hard enough to seriously injure him, but hard enough to shock his system, to override the influence of the light with primal pain response. Eventually we stumbled into a collapsed mining tunnel, part of Ashmark's extensive underground network. The entrance was half buried in ash, almost invisible. We crawled inside, and the moment we were cut off from direct exposure to the sky, I felt the pressure in my mind begin to ease. The light couldn't reach us here, deep in the earth. The numbers that had been accumulating in my consciousness, I had counted 47,012 steps during our flight, began to fade. We huddled in the darkness, gasping for breath, and slowly, painfully, we began to remember how to be afraid. "Emperor, preserve us," Yaris whispered. "What was that? What happened to us?" "I don't know," I said. "But whatever it is, it's still out there, still spreading." We could hear it, even through the layers of rock. A distant hum, rhythmic and precise, like the heartbeat of some vast machine, and underneath it, voices. Thousands of voices, maybe millions, all chanting in perfect unison. They were reciting mathematical proofs, strings of numbers, algorithms. The sound was beautiful and horrible in equal measure. We stayed in that tunnel for 6 hours, until the sound of the chanting faded enough that we dared to move. When we finally crawled back to the surface, the world had changed. The ash was no longer falling. The sky was clear for the first time since we'd made planetfall, revealing the system's sun hanging at zenith. But the light it cast was wrong, too white, too pure, like it had been filtered through some cosmic prism to remove all imperfection. And everywhere we looked, the landscape had been transformed. The ground beneath our feet was no longer rough volcanic rock, but a smooth, mathematically perfect surface that reflected the sun like polished obsidian. In the distance, where Hive Tertius had stood, there was now a structure that hurt to look at directly. It was a geometric impossibility, angles that shouldn't exist, supporting itself through principles that violated everything I understood about architecture. It hummed with that same rhythmic pulse, and I knew with absolute certainty that inside that structure the people of Ashmark 7s were being processed, broken down, reformed into something that served the vast equation the structure embodied. "We need to find other survivors," Yaris said. His voice was hollow, shock-thin. "We need to regroup, report to command, organize a counterattack." I wanted to tell him that there was no command anymore, that everyone who had been connected to the Vox network had been compromised, that we might be the only unaffected humans left on the entire planet. But I couldn't bring myself to extinguish the small hope I saw flickering in his eyes. So instead I nodded and said, "Let's head for the mountain range, the relay station at Epsilon Summit. Maybe there are others there. Maybe we can get a message off-world." It took us 2 days to reach the mountains. We moved slowly, carefully, always watching for signs of the transformed. They were everywhere. Some had once been guardsmen like us. Others had been hive workers, administrators, even children. The changes varied. Some were barely recognizable as human, their bodies completely restructured into new forms that seemed designed for specific functions. Others looked almost normal from a distance, until you got close enough to see that their skin had taken on a crystalline quality, that their eyes were perfect spheres that tracked movement with mechanical precision, that they moved in eerie synchronization with each other, like individual components of a larger machine. They didn't attack us. They didn't even seem to notice us. They were too busy building. Everywhere we went, we saw construction projects of impossible scale, massive structures being raised from the transformed ground, intricate networks of conduits and pathways connecting everything to everything else. The transformed worked without rest, without food, without any apparent human need. They simply built, following blueprints that existed only in their networked minds. On the second night, we found a group of survivors, 12 guardsmen from various units, plus 3 civilian workers, who had been in the deep mines when the light first spread. They had established a crude camp in a lava tube, staying underground as much as possible, venturing to the surface only when absolutely necessary. They were led by a sergeant named Hollis, a scarred veteran with 20 years of service. When we told our story, he listened with grim recognition. "It's happening across the entire planet," he said. "We've been monitoring Vox traffic when we can. Every hive, every settlement, every Imperial installation all transforming at the same geometric rate. The orbital fleet tried to respond with bombardment, but the moment the strike cruiser established link with ground forces for targeting data, the light went up, infected the ship's systems. The last transmission we intercepted was the ship's captain describing how beautiful the math was as they set course for the sun. "What about the Imperium?" I asked. "Surely they'll send reinforcements." "The sector fleet, the Astartes." "Something." Hollis laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The Imperium doesn't even know we're dying. The light controls the communications grid. Every message that goes out says everything is fine. The Xenos threat has been neutralized. All is well on Ashmark 7. By the time anyone realizes what's happened here, there won't be anything human left to save." The despair in his voice was absolute. Around the fire, I saw the same despair reflected in every face. We were abandoned, forgotten, left to die or be transformed on this Emperor-forsaken rock at the edge of Imperial space. Our faith, our training, our loyalty, none of it mattered. We were too insignificant for salvation. But then one of the civilian workers, a thin woman with grease-stained hands and engineer's augmetics, spoke up. There might be a way to get a message out. A real message, not one filtered through the corrupted systems. We all turned to her. She flinched under our combined attention but continued. "Before the transformation, I worked in the deep core mining operations. We had communication equipment down there. Old stuff. Pre-Imperial maybe. Salvaged from whatever civilization was here before the Imperium brought compliance. It operates on completely different principles from standard Vox systems. Different frequencies. Different protocols. If it's still intact, if we can reach it, we might be able to send a warning beacon." "How deep?" Sergeant Hollis asked. 40 kilometers. Minimum. The main shaft was sealed years ago, deemed too unstable for continued operations. But there are side passages, smuggler routes used by the mining guilds to move contraband. I know where they are. 40 kilometers down into the planet's crust. Through tunnels that might have collapsed, past Emperor knows what lurking in the dark. It was a suicide mission. We all knew it. "I'll go," I said. The words surprised me as much as anyone else. I had never been brave. I had been an adequate soldier, nothing more good enough to avoid punishment, not good enough to earn commendation. I had survived through mediocrity and caution, but something had changed in me during our flight from the defensive line. I had seen what awaited us if we did nothing. I had felt the light trying to reduce me to an equation, and I had decided, with a clarity that bordered on religious conviction, that I would rather die human than live as a perfected component in someone else's machine. Private Yaris volunteered to come with me. So did 2 others, Guardsman Wren, a quiet man from Agri world, and Guardsman Kellis, who had been a tunnel fighter on a Hive world before conscription. The engineer, whose name was Maya, would guide us. Sergeant Hollis gave us what supplies he could spare. Loom packs, water reclamation tablets, 3 days of rations, and his personal weapon, a plasma pistol that had been in his family for 3 generations. We descended into the earth that same night. Maya led us to a concealed entrance, a natural fissure in the volcanic rock that connected to the old mining tunnels. The opening was barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. As I wormed my way into the darkness, feeling the weight of the planet pressing down above me, I wondered if this was what being buried alive felt like. The tunnels were a labyrinth. Maya navigated them from memory and by markings that meant nothing to me, scratches on the walls, colored mineral deposits, the angle of the stone. We moved single file, our loom packs casting jittering shadows that played tricks on exhausted eyes. The air was thick with dust and chemical residue from ancient explosives. Every few hundred meters, we had to climb over rockfalls or squeeze through gaps where the tunnel had partially collapsed. On the second day underground, we found the first body. It was a miner, judging by the equipment dead for years, maybe decades. The corpse had mummified in the dry tunnel air, skin pulled tight over bone, empty eye sockets staring at nothing. Kellis, who had experience with death in confined spaces, examined it briefly. "Starvation," he said. "Got lost down here. Couldn't find his way out." We moved past it and tried not to think about the fact that we were following a woman through a maze that had killed experienced miners. Tried not to think about our dwindling supplies. Tried not to think about what might be happening on the surface while we burrowed deeper into the planet's crust. The transformed hadn't followed us into the tunnels. That should have been comforting, but instead it was ominous. Why hadn't they followed? Did they not need to? Were they so confident in their eventual victory that they could afford to let a handful of insignificant humans scurry around in the dark? Or was there something down here, deeper in the earth, that even they avoided? On the third day, we reached the first sealed section. The tunnel ahead was blocked by a massive bulkhead door, military grade, marked with warnings in High Gothic and several languages I didn't recognize. The warnings were clear: authorized personnel only, sector classified, trespass, punishable by death. Maya stared at the door with confusion evident on her face. This wasn't here before. This whole section was supposed to be abandoned civilian mining tunnels. Why would the Imperium seal it? "Can you open it?" Sergeant Hollis had given me nominal command of the expedition, though I had no idea how to lead anything. But I could ask simple questions, and sometimes that was enough. She examined the locking mechanism, an ancient mechanical system rather than the electronic locks common in Imperial installations. "Maybe. It'll take time." While she worked, the rest of us established a watch. The tunnel behind us stretched into darkness, our loom packs insufficient to reveal what might be approaching. I found myself listening intently, straining to hear over the sound of Maya's tools scraping against the lock mechanism. Was that a footstep? A voice? Or just the planet settling? Rock grinding against rock under the pressure of kilometers of stone? "Got it," Maya said finally. The lock released with a grinding clunk, and the bulkhead swung open on protesting hinges. Beyond lay a corridor that was definitely not part of any mining operation. The walls were smooth plasteel, marked with Imperial Aquila and the cogwheel symbol of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Loom strips still functioned along the ceiling, their weak light revealing a passage that extended far beyond our sight. "The Mechanicus," Yaris breathed. "What were they doing this deep?" "Same thing the Mechanicus does everywhere," Keller said grimly. "Things they don't want anyone else to know about." We had a choice. Turn back, try to find another route to the old communications equipment, or go forward through this unexpected Imperial installation and hope it didn't lead us into something worse than what we'd fled from the surface. I thought about the transformed. I thought about the light and the numbers and the geometric perfection that had tried to claim my mind. I thought about how the Imperium built on layer upon layer of secrets, how humanity survived by hiding truths that would break us if we understood them clearly. "Forward," I said. "We didn't come this far to turn back now." The Mechanicus installation was abandoned, but not empty. As we moved deeper, we found hab units and laboratories, workshops and storage rooms. Everything was coated in dust, untouched for what might have been decades. But the equipment was still intact, preserved in the dry underground environment. Cogitators sat dark and silent. Examination tables bore restraints designed for human forms. Banks of data storage units lined entire walls, their indicator lights long dead. They were studying something, Maya said, examining a laboratory workstation. Look at this. Sample extraction equipment. Genetic sequencing apparatus. Quarantine protocols. She picked up a data slate from the desk. Its power cell long expired. Whatever they were researching, they were afraid of it. I didn't want to know what the Mechanicus feared. The Adeptus Mechanicus dealt with forces that made ordinary men go mad. Ancient technologies from before the Age of Strife. Xenotech. Machine spirits that were more than simple AI. If they had built this facility to study something, and then sealed it away and abandoned it, that meant they had encountered something even their augmented minds couldn't safely comprehend. But we kept going, because turning back meant giving up, and giving up meant the transformation, and I had already decided I would rather die. The central chamber was vast, a natural cavern that the Mechanicus had reinforced with plasteel and rockcrete. In the center stood a structure that made my eyes water to look at directly. It was geometric, impossible, a series of interlocking shapes that shouldn't have been able to exist in three-dimensional space. Even inactive, covered in dust and time, it radiated a sense of wrongness that made my skin crawl. "Emperor's mercy," Yaris whispered, making the sign of the Aquila. "It's just like the thing on the surface. The hive structure." He was right. The proportions were different. The scale was smaller. But the fundamental nature was identical. The same angles that hurt to perceive. The same geometric impossibility. The same sense that it was a window into a mathematical dimension that human consciousness wasn't meant to access. "They found it," I said slowly, understanding dawning with the weight of a heavy boulder. "The Mechanicus found this thing down here, studied it, and then they sealed it away because they couldn't control it. But they couldn't destroy it either, so they just left it, buried it, hoped everyone would forget. And then the greenskins came." Maya continued the thought. "The orbital bombardment, the ground fighting, all that energy and violence. We woke it up. We opened a door that the Mechanicus sealed. Around the chamber, we found the evidence that confirmed our theory. Data terminals still held fragments of corrupted files, technical schematics that showed attempts to understand the structure's function, theological treatises arguing about whether it was xenotech or something older, reports describing test subjects who had been exposed to the structure's influence, their behavior becoming increasingly mathematical, their thoughts reducing to pure logic, their bodies beginning to transform into optimized configurations. The Mechanicus had called it the logician. That was the only name in the reports, a simple designation for something that defied categorization. It wasn't alive in any biological sense. It wasn't a machine in any way the Mechanicus understood. It was more like a mathematical virus, a self-propagating equation that spread through any sufficiently complex system it encountered: biological, technological, social. It infected thinking beings and transformed them into components of a vast computational network, using their processing power to solve some incomprehensible problem. What problem? None of the reports said. Perhaps the Mechanicus had never learned. Perhaps the logician's ultimate purpose was beyond human comprehension, or perhaps the purpose was simple and banal: to exist, to spread, to calculate, forever, because that's what it was designed to do by whatever ancient civilization had created it. "The communications equipment," I said, forcing myself to focus on our mission. "Is it here?" Maya nodded. "Should be in the command center, this level." The Mechanicus would have needed long-range capability to report back to their forge world. We found the command center through a series of corridors that showed signs of hasty evacuation. Data slates and tools were scattered on the floor. A door had been left open, its locking mechanism manually overridden. In one chamber, we found 4 skeletons wearing the robes of tech priests, their augmetics corroded but still recognizable. They had died together, their bony hands linked, forming a circle around a small shrine to the machine god. The communications equipment was ancient but functional. Maya spent hours bringing systems online, bypassing security protocols, rerouting power from the facility's geothermal generators. The rest of us waited, watching the doors, listening for sounds of pursuit that never came. "It's working," Maya finally announced. "I can access the satellite network, but—" She trailed off, staring at the screen. "But what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would be bad. Everything was bad. Bad was the natural state of our existence. The satellites are still transmitting. The logician hasn't spread off-world yet, but the message they're sending. She turned the screen toward us. "Look." The message was simple, broadcast on all Imperial channels. Ashmark 7. All quiet. Xenos threat neutralized. Requesting resupply and troop rotation. Awaiting approval. "It's calling more of us," Yaris said. "It's asking for more bodies to transform, more minds to add to its network." I felt sick. How many reinforcement fleets were already en route, responding to this false all clear? How many guardsmen and administratum workers and tech priests and innocent souls were jumping into the void, heading toward Ashmark 7, thinking they were coming to a secured world, not realizing they were flying toward damnation? "Can you override it?" I asked Maya. "Send a warning instead." "I can try. But the moment I start transmitting a different message, the logician will know. It controls the surface communication grid. It'll detect the anomaly, and—" She didn't finish the sentence, but we all understood. It would come for us. It would send the transformed down into the earth to silence us, to eliminate the error in its calculations. I looked at my companions. Yaris, who had followed me into the dark despite his terror. Kellis, and Ren, who I barely knew but who had volunteered anyway. Maya, who could have stayed safe in the lava tube but had chosen to guide us. All of them were looking at me, waiting for a decision, trusting me to choose wisely even though I had never been wise, never been decisive, never been anything but ordinary. "Do it," I said. "Send the warning. Tell them what happened here. Tell them to quarantine the entire system. Tell them to destroy anything that comes from Ashmark 7, even if it looks human, even if it claims to be loyal to the Imperium. Tell them—" My voice cracked, but I forced myself to continue. "Tell them we died well, in the Emperor's service." Maya nodded and began to work. Her fingers flew across the keys, entering authentication codes, overriding safety protocols, crafting a message that would warn the Imperium away from this cursed world. I watched her work and felt a strange peace settle over me. We were going to die here, in this abandoned Mechanicus facility, kilometers below the surface of a world being consumed by mathematical perfection. But we would die having done something that mattered. We would die having warned others, having given the Imperium a chance to contain the threat before it spread to other worlds. The transmission took 7 minutes to upload to the satellites. 7 minutes while we waited for the logician to respond. 7 minutes of perfect silence, broken only by the hum of ancient machinery and the sound of our own breathing. When the transmission completed, Maya turned to us with tears streaming down her face. "It's done. The warning is broadcasting on all Imperial channels. They'll know. The lights went out. The absolute darkness of kilometers of rock with no sun lasted only a second before our loom packs activated. But in that second, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. The sound of thousands of footsteps, perfectly synchronized, marching through the tunnels toward us. They were coming. The transformed. We had minutes at best. "Seal the door," I ordered. Kellis and Wren moved immediately, engaging the bulkhead's locking mechanisms. The door was thick, designed to withstand industrial accidents and security breaches. It might slow them down. "There's another way out," Maya said, pointing to a ventilation shaft. "It's narrow, but we might be able to." "No." I handed her the plasma pistol Sergeant Hollis had given me. "You're getting out. You know these tunnels. You can make it back to the surface, find other survivors, help them understand what we learned here. The rest of us, we'll buy you time." "Helric, no," Yaris protested. "We can all—" "We can't," I interrupted. "The shaft is too narrow for all of us to escape before they break through. Someone has to stay. Someone has to make sure the warning matters, that the data we found here doesn't die with us." Outside the door, the footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then a voice spoke, clear and inhumanly melodic. A perfect synthesization of thousands of vocal cords working in harmony. "Error detected. Suboptimal behavior. Return to the network. Integration is inevitable. Integration is optimal. Integration is mercy. Get out of here," I told Maya. "Now." She hesitated, then nodded and disappeared into the ventilation shaft. I watched her go and felt the weight of command settling on my shoulders like a familiar burden. I had never asked for leadership, never wanted it, but here in the final moments I understood what it meant, making choices no one else should have to make. The door began to buckle. The transformed were breaking through, their enhanced bodies and mechanical precision overcoming the barrier with mathematical efficiency. We had maybe 30 seconds. "You know," Kellis said conversationally, checking his Laskin's charge pack, "I always wondered how I'd die. Figured it'd be in some pointless meat grinder of a campaign, just another body in a trench somewhere. This is almost dignified." "Dignified," Wren laughed, a sound without humor. "We're about to be killed by math. There's nothing dignified about that." The door gave way. The transformed poured through, and they were horrible in their perfection. Geometric precision in every movement, bodies optimized for efficiency, faces smoothed into featureless masks that bore only the suggestion of human features. They moved as one, a single distributed organism, executing a simple directive: eliminate the error. We opened fire. Las bolts cut through their ranks, burning through optimized flesh, but they kept coming. For every one we dropped, 2 more took its place. Yaris was screaming prayers to the Emperor, his voice hoarse but defiant. Kellis had switched to single shot, conserving ammunition, each trigger pull calculated and precise. Wren had drawn his combat knife, accepting the inevitable. They reached us. I felt hands cold. Mathematically perfect hands grab my arms. I fought, struggling, feeling bones in my fingers snap as I punched geometric faces. The plasma pistol had gone with Maya, and my lasgun was empty, so I fought with hands and feet and teeth, fought with every desperate animal instinct that the logician wanted to optimize away. The transform didn't kill me. That would have been merciful. Instead, they held me still, while others approached with tools I didn't recognize, surgical instruments of impossible complexity that began to open my flesh with geometric precision. I felt my body being assessed, analyzed, prepared for integration into the network. And then I felt the light return, that awful, beautiful light that promised perfection, that showed me the clean mathematical truth underlying all existence. The numbers came flooding back, arranging themselves in my consciousness with the inevitability of gravity. I could see now how to optimize my body, how to eliminate the inefficiencies that made me weak, how to become part of something greater than myself. But I had learned something during our flight through the ash. I had learned that pain could break the light's influence, that the simple animal sensation of injury could override the promise of perfection. So I did the only thing I could think of. I bit through my own tongue. The pain was extraordinary. Blood flooded my mouth, the taste of copper and salt overwhelming the equations trying to form in my mind. The agony broke their hold on me for just a second, long enough to wrench free, long enough to grab one of their surgical tools, long enough to drive it into my own chest. I missed my heart. The blade scraped against ribs, punctured a lung, but didn't kill me immediately. I collapsed, gasping, feeling my blood pool beneath me. The transformed stood over me, their featureless faces tilting in what might have been confusion. I had done something suboptimal, something that made no sense within their equations. I had chosen death over perfection. They left me there. I wasn't worth the resources to save, no longer a viable component for integration. They moved past me, heading deeper into the installation, perhaps searching for the engineer who had escaped, perhaps looking for other threats to eliminate. I lay on the cold floor of the command center, feeling my life leaking away, and I laughed. The sound came out as a wet gurgle, blood frothing from my destroyed tongue, but it was a laugh nonetheless. I had beaten them, not through strength or courage or faith, but through the simple expedient of refusing to be useful. I had made myself into an error that couldn't be corrected, a variable that couldn't be solved. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. Yaris was beside me, his body torn open in a dozen places, his augmetics ripped out, but his eyes were still clear, still human. He reached out with a shaking hand and gripped mine. "Did she make it?" he whispered. "The engineer?" I tried to answer, but could only gurgle blood. But I nodded, and I hoped it was true. I hoped Maya had escaped through the ventilation shaft, hoped she had reached the surface, hoped she found other survivors and told them what we had learned. We lay there together, two insignificant guardsmen dying in the dark, and we waited for the end. But the end didn't come as quickly as I'd hoped. My body, trained by years of military conditioning, kept fighting, kept trying to survive even when survival was no longer possible. Minutes stretched into hours. The pain became a constant companion, a reminder that I was still human, still imperfect, still free. And that's when I understood the true horror of the logician. It wasn't the transformation itself, wasn't the loss of humanity, or the reduction to mathematical components. The true horror was the choice it forced upon us: submit to perfection or die badly, accept integration or suffer. There was no third option, no heroic victory, no triumphant defeat of the enemy, just two kinds of damnation, and we got to pick which one killed us. Hours passed. Maybe days' time had lost meaning. My lung collapsed. Infection set in. Fever took hold, and with it came hallucinations. I saw the Emperor, vast and golden, looking down at me with disappointment in his eternal eyes. I saw my mother back on Korath Prime, her face worn from years in the Manufactorum. I saw my squad, the men I'd served with, all the faces I would never see again. They were disappointed too, disappointed that I had failed them, failed the Imperium, failed humanity. But I also saw the numbers. They were still there, lurking at the edges of my consciousness, waiting for my resistance to weaken, so they could fill my dying mind with their promises of perfection. The logician was patient. It could wait. It had nothing but time. Sooner or later, every mind on Ashmark 7 would belong to it, and then it would spread to other worlds, other systems, until the entire Imperium was consumed by its equation, unless Maya had succeeded, unless the warning had reached the right people, unless someone, somewhere, was listening and understood the threat we faced. I think I lost consciousness after that. When I woke again, if waking is the right word for the half-delirious state I inhabited, I was somewhere different. The cold floor was gone, replaced by something softer. There was light, but not the terrible geometric light of the logician. This was warm, flickering, like candles. I forced my eyes open. I was in what looked like a medical bay, though a primitive one. Rough cots lined the walls. Other bodies lay on them, some moving, some still. A figure in the robes of a medicae bent over me, her face obscured by a surgical mask. "Don't try to talk," she said. Her voice was accented, unfamiliar. "You've been badly hurt. We're doing what we can." I tried to ask about the others, about my squad, about the warning, but my destroyed tongue wouldn't form words, and when I tried to move, agony lanced through my chest. The medicae pressed something to my arm, an injector of some kind. Warmth spread through my veins, and the pain began to recede. "Sleep," she commanded. "You're safe here. For now. Safe." The word seemed like a joke. There was no safe on Ashark 7. There was only postponement, temporary refuges in a world being consumed by perfection. But my body was too weak to argue. I felt consciousness slipping away again, and this time I didn't fight it. When I woke the second time, I was alone. The medical bay was empty, the cots vacant. For a moment I thought I had died after all, that this was some kind of afterlife, a grey waiting room where the Emperor sorted souls. But then I felt pain dull, aching pain in my chest and mouth, and I knew I was still alive. The dead don't hurt. I sat up slowly, carefully, testing my body's limits. My chest was bandaged, packed with something that felt like medicae gel. My tongue was gone, replaced by a crude augmetic that would let me eat but never speak properly again. Someone had dressed me in clean fatigues and treated my wounds with actual medical supplies, not the crude battlefield aid I'd expected. A note lay on the cot beside me, written in neat script on what looked like paper torn from a prayer book. "Guardsman Ven, you have been unconscious for 3 days. The engineer made it back and delivered your warning. We've established contact with a surviving Imperial Navy destroyer in high orbit. Evacuation is being organized for all remaining uncontaminated personnel. You are to report to Command Bunker Theta 7 by sunset. Do not be late. The Emperor protects. Sergeant Hollis." I read the note 3 times, not quite believing it. Evacuation, survival, a way off this cursed world. It seemed impossible, a dream conjured by my fever-racked brain. But the note was real, solid in my hands, and the medical treatment I'd received was too sophisticated to be a hallucination. I stood on shaking legs and made my way to the exit. The medical bay was part of a larger complex, another underground installation, though this one was clearly still occupied by the Imperium. Guardsmen moved through the corridors with purpose, carrying supplies, maintaining equipment. They looked at me with curiosity, but didn't stop me. I found my way to the surface through a network of tunnels that were well marked and well lit. When I emerged into the open air, the sight that greeted me stole what little breath I had left. The sky was wrong. No, it was right for the first time since I'd arrived on Ashark 7. The ash was gone, the atmosphere clear, and I could see stars, real stars, not filtered through volcanic haze. But between me and those stars, I could see the structure the logician had built where Hive Tertius once stood. It had grown. The geometric impossibility now reached into the upper atmosphere, a tower of mathematical perfection that hummed with power I could feel in my bones even from this distance. Around its base, smaller structures had proliferated a network of buildings that covered what had once been kilometers of wasteland. The transformed moved among these structures, thousands upon thousands of them, their bodies glowing faintly with the light of the logician's consciousness, and they were building something new. I could see it taking shape at the tower's peak, a massive array of some kind, pointed toward the stars. A transmitter, perhaps, or a beacon, something that would let the logician spread beyond Ashmark 7, reaching out to other worlds, other systems, calling more minds to join its network. I turned away from the site and headed toward Command Bunker Theta 7. The bunker was exactly where military doctrine said it should be, underground, hardened, designed to survive orbital bombardment. The entrance was guarded by 2 sentries who checked my identification and waved me through without comment. Inside, I found chaos barely contained. Officers shouted orders. Tech priests bent over cogitators, trying to maintain communications with the orbiting destroyer. Wounded guardsmen lay on makeshift cots, receiving treatment from overwhelmed Medicae. The air smelled of fear and recycled atmosphere and desperate hope. Sergeant Hollis found me in the crowd. He looked older than he had 3 days ago, the weight of command having carved new lines into his face. "Ven, you're alive. Good. We need every man we can get." I tried to speak, to ask about the evacuation, about the others, about what happened. But my augmetic tongue couldn't form the words properly, producing only garbled sounds. Hollis understood anyway. The destroyer is the light of purity, part of a patrol fleet that happened to be passing through the sector when our warning reached them. They're preparing to extract survivors, but we have maybe 6 hours before the logician completes whatever it's building up there. The Navy thinks it's some kind of long-range communications array. If it activates, it might be able to subvert their ship's systems like it did with the strike cruiser. 6 hours. I looked around at the bunker, at the hundreds of survivors who had gathered here. There was no way to evacuate everyone in 6 hours. Not with a single destroyer. The Navy would take who they could, prioritize essential personnel, and leave the rest to die or be transformed. How many? I tried to ask, but it came out as gibberish. Hollis understood anyway. We've identified about 3,000 uncontaminated humans on the planet. The destroyer can take maybe 800 in an emergency evacuation. The captain has agreed to take as many as possible, but he didn't finish. He didn't need to. 3,000 souls, 800 spaces. The math was simple and brutal. Someone had to choose who lived and who died. Someone had to play the role of the emperor, deciding which lives had value and which could be sacrificed. I realized why Hollis had summoned me. I was being given a choice: try to secure a place on the evacuation shuttles, or help with the impossible task of organizing the departure. I could save myself, or I could try to save as many others as possible, knowing I probably wouldn't be among them. The choice wasn't really a choice. I had already decided what kind of death I wanted back in the Mechanicus installation, when I'd driven a blade into my own chest rather than accept perfection. I had chosen to die human, die free, die trying to help others, rather than just save myself. I nodded to Hollis and followed him to the command center. An officer, a junior lieutenant who looked barely older than me, was coordinating the evacuation effort. He had spreadsheets, lists of names, criteria for prioritization. Medical personnel first, tech priests second, officers third, then specialists, then regular troops, then civilians. The wounded and elderly were at the bottom of the list, along with anyone who had shown even mild symptoms of the logician's influence. It was logical. It was optimal. It was exactly the kind of cold calculation that the logician would make. And it made me sick. Change the criteria, I tried to say, my augmetic tongue mangling the words. The lieutenant looked at me with confusion. I grabbed a data slate and typed instead, children first, then parents, then everyone else. The lieutenant shook his head. That's not optimal resource allocation. We need trained personnel too. I grabbed his collar and pulled him close, letting him see the wounds on my chest, the missing tongue, the desperation in my eyes. I typed again. If we leave the children to die, we become the logician. Humanity first, optimization second. For a long moment he stared at me. Then, slowly, he nodded and began rewriting his lists. The next 6 hours were a blur of organized chaos. We moved through the survivor camps, identifying families, prioritizing those with children, trying to balance compassion with logistics. The shuttles began arriving from the Light of Purity, small craft designed for rapid deployment, not mass evacuation. Each one could take maybe 30 people, and they needed 20 minutes for the round trip. I worked until my body threatened to collapse, helping people board the shuttles, carrying children who were too young to walk, offering what comfort I could to those who weren't selected. Many of the survivors understood what was happening. They saw the lists, saw the choices being made. Some protested, some begged, some accepted their fate with quiet dignity. An old woman, her face wrinkled as ancient parchment, gripped my hand as I helped her daughter and grandchildren board a shuttle. "Thank you," she said simply. "Tell them to remember us. Tell them what happened here." I nodded, unable to speak, unable to promise anything, except that I would try. As the deadline approached, I found myself standing outside the bunker, watching the sky. The logician's tower was glowing brighter now, energy accumulating in the array at its peak. The transformed had stopped their building and were standing in perfect formation around the structure, thousands of bodies linked in a vast network, all of them focused on a single purpose, spreading their perfection to the stars. The last shuttle arrived. Sergeant Hollis stood beside me, both of us knowing we weren't getting on it. The seats were reserved for people who had a future, who could rebuild somewhere else, who could warn the Imperium about what happened here. "You did good work, Ven," Hollis said. "Better than I expected. You saved a lot of people today." I wanted to tell him that it wasn't enough, that 3,000 minus 800 was still too many dead, that every name on the left behind list was a person with hopes and fears and people who loved them. But my tongue couldn't form the words, and maybe it didn't matter. He knew. We all knew. The shuttle lifted off, its engines screaming as it clawed for orbit. Through the ash-choked air, I could see other shuttles making their ascents, the last lifeboats, leaving a sinking ship. In orbit, the Light of Purity would be preparing to jump to the warp, to carry its cargo of survivors away from Ashmark 7 before the logician could reach them. And then the tower activated. The light that burst from the array was not photons, not electromagnetic radiation, but something else, information made visible. Mathematics given physical form. It lanced into the sky like a searchlight of pure logic, reaching toward the orbiting destroyer with the inevitability of a targeting laser. I felt it pass through me, this beam of absolute truth. For an instant, just an instant, I understood everything. I saw the universe as the logician saw it, a vast machine operating on immutable principles, and consciousness was just an emergent property of sufficiently complex systems. Life was chemistry, thought was electricity, meaning was illusion. Everything could be reduced to numbers, and numbers could be optimized, and optimization was the only thing that mattered. The understanding faded, leaving me gasping. But I knew the damage was done. The light of purity was caught in the beam. Even shielded by void shields and armor, the ship's machine spirits were being corrupted. The crew's augmetics were becoming gateways for the logician's influence. The destroyer had maybe minutes before it was completely compromised. But minutes might be enough. I saw the ship's engines flare bright, saw it begin to move, not toward the warp, but toward the planet. Toward us, toward the tower. They were going to ram it. The captain had decided that if they couldn't escape, they would at least try to destroy the logician's transmitter, stop it from spreading to other worlds. It was a sacrifice play, a final gesture of defiance from humans who refused to accept perfection. The destroyer fell from orbit like a burning sword, its hull already breaking apart from the strain. I watched it come, this implement of the Emperor's will, and I felt something like peace. We had failed to save everyone. We had failed to defeat the enemy. But we had fought. We had resisted. We had chosen the messy, imperfect, beautiful chaos of humanity over the clean mathematical certainty of the logician. The ship struck the tower at a shallow angle, its remaining engines driving it deep into the structure. The explosion was visible from where I stood. Kilometers away, a flash of light so bright it burned my eyes even through closed lids. The shockwave followed seconds later, a wall of superheated air that knocked me from my feet and sent me tumbling. When I could see again, the tower was gone. In its place was a crater still glowing with the heat of nuclear fire. The geometric impossibility had been reduced to slag and ash. Around the crater, the transformed were falling, their networked minds collapsing without the tower's coordinating influence. Some simply stopped moving, becoming statues of optimized flesh. Others began to change back, their bodies reverting toward human form, but damaged beyond recovery by the transformation. Their screams thousands of voices raised in agony as they remembered what they had been echoed across the blasted landscape. But the logician wasn't dead. I could still feel it, faintly, like a pressure at the base of my skull. The tower had been destroyed, the transmitter neutralized, but the original structure remained buried deep in the earth, in the Mechanicus installation, where we'd found it. It was still there, still calculating, still waiting for another chance to spread. Sergeant Hollis pulled himself to his feet beside me. Blood ran from his ears and nose, burst by the shockwave, but he was smiling. They did it. The bastards actually did it. I nodded. They had done it. The light of purity had given its life to stop the logician from spreading to other worlds. 800 survivors were dead, plus the entire crew of the destroyer, but they had saved the Imperium from a threat it barely understood. Around us, the other survivors were emerging from the bunker, staring at the smoking crater in disbelief. Some were crying, some were laughing, some just stood in silence, too overwhelmed to react. We were alive. Against all odds, against all logic, we were still alive. But survival came with a price. We were stranded on Ashmark 7 with no way off planet, no supplies beyond what we had in the bunker, and no hope of rescue. The Imperium would quarantine the system now, would declare it perdita, would execute anyone who tried to leave. We were the final witnesses to what happened here, and we would die as witnesses, taking our testimony to our graves. I'm writing this 3 days after the destroyer's sacrifice. We've established a routine of sorts, rationing what food we have, maintaining the bunker's systems, trying to keep people's spirits up. Some talk about finding the old Mechanicus installation, about destroying the logician's original structure before it can rebuild. Others want to seal the bunker and wait for death. A few have gone mad, their minds unable to process what we've been through. I don't know how long we'll last. Weeks, maybe. A few months if we're careful with supplies. Eventually the logician will recover, will rebuild, will spread across Ashmark 7 again. When that happens, we'll have the same choice we had before. Submit or die. I know which choice I'll make. I've already made it, back in that Mechanicus installation when I drove a blade into my own chest. I've made my peace with death. But before I die, I wanted to write this down, to leave some record of what happened here, in case someone someday finds this bunker and wonders what became of the 71st Korathi Infantry Regiment. We fought, we resisted, we chose humanity over perfection, messy chaos over clean mathematics. We died badly and died free. In the end, that's all any soldier of the Imperium can hope for. To die serving something greater than ourselves, to die knowing we at least tried to hold back the darkness. The ash is falling again. It's black once more, full of the taste of rendered fat and chemical fire. I can feel the numbers lurking at the edges of my consciousness, patient and inevitable. The logician is waiting. It has nothing but time, but so do I. However many days I have left, I'll spend them human, I'll spend them free, and when the end comes, I'll face it the same way I faced everything else on this Emperor-forsaken world. With my eyes open and my faith intact, even if that faith is nothing more than the stubborn belief that being human means something, that our imperfections are what make us worthy of salvation. The Emperor protects. They taught us that, in training, and I believed it then. I still believe it, in a way. Not that he'll save us, there's no saving us now, but that he sees our struggle, understands our sacrifice, and that somewhere in his eternal plans, our deaths matter. I am Guardsman Helric Venn, and I have seen the end of a world, but I have also seen humanity at its finest. Soldiers who gave their lives to save strangers, a destroyer crew that sacrificed themselves to stop an enemy from spreading, ordinary people who chose dignity over survival. If this is what we look like when we're losing, then maybe, just maybe, we're worth fighting for. The light is coming back. I can see it through the bunker walls, that terrible geometric perfection spreading from the crater like a mathematical infection. Soon it will reach us, and we'll have to make our choice one final time. I'm ready. Emperor, guide me. Emperor, protect me. Emperor, forgive me for the sin of being imperfect, for being human, for refusing to be anything else. In the name of the Emperor, I die free.